investing and money. And when Bitcoin launched, Bitcoin as well. And so let's jump straight in to part one this week in Bitcoin. Okay, so there was the conference, Bitcoin 2025. Now, here's the overarching theme. I'm not going to go through everything, but if there was one takeaway, this is a very, very different conference to the Bitcoin conferences when I used to go back in the day. My first one was in 2011, 2 years after Bitcoin launched. And I stopped at a certain point because ransom is a thing. And I have a security strategy, and it does not involve going to Bitcoin conferences anymore. But with today's technology, you can catch up on everything you need to know anyway. So what are the three overarching themes? Right. Firstly, TradFi is in. Everything I've been warning you about in Bitcoin over the last episodes of Bitcoin Hard Talk, it all comes into play. There was pitch after pitch after pitch, booth after booth after booth, speaker after speaker after speaker of people that weren't around, that are new to the industry and have been getting involved in Bitcoin financial services. And some of the people that have been around for a while, they want you to borrow against your Bitcoin. That is the most prevalent theme. And if you've been watching any of my episodes, you know the pitfalls of that. You know my forecast around that. And you need to risk manage that accordingly. You can catch up on previous episodes if you want. The second thing they want you to do in Bitcoin 2025, they want you to buy their shares in a public company on the stock market or a SPAC or a reverse merger or acquisition, because rather than buying Bitcoin, they want you to buy their shares instead, so that they can pay their Bitcoin and then they can pay their salaries and all the other leverage and games that they can play on top. So they want you to buy shares rather than buy your own Bitcoin. The third overarching theme is that they want you to bag hold US Treasuries and US debt, because they are running out of places to roll over the debt in the US to. And what they want to do is back newly issued stablecoins by those US Treasuries. As yields start going up in price, they get a free treasury, you get a stablecoin, and then they get to take the yield, which is the higher the long-term rates of the 10-year and 30-year treasuries that we'll be covering in the macro section, the more Bitcoin they get to buy, and the more they get to essentially get a free trade of short the dollar, long Bitcoin that I've been covering in other episodes as well. Now, eventually, hopefully some of these give yield on, but regulations are being put in place so that they get a 2-year head start, try and get as much Bitcoin as possible, while the new world order and the multipolar world order that I've been talking about gets reset, because there is $10 trillion that needs to be refinanced. And last week we covered that the 20-year auction, they weren't able to subscribe to it in this debt-based Ponzi scheme, and it wasn't as successful as it needed to be. So they want you to buy their stablecoin, and there is stablecoin after stablecoin after stablecoin, as well as the OGs and the original stablecoin issuers as well, which we'll be going through. Right. The rule of Bitcoin Hard Talk. All you need to do is the opposite of what everyone wants you to do at Bitcoin 2025, which is don't borrow against your Bitcoin, just own your Bitcoin. Don't put it in margin. Don't put yourself in a position where you get margin called. And you can own your Bitcoin in self-custody. Don't buy Bitcoin shares. Make sure that you've got your own Bitcoin held in self-custody. And you don't need their stable coins, because you can try and figure out how you earn the Bitcoin rather than getting them. Now, those rules don't apply across the board, but if you are very early to Bitcoin, your job is to get as much Bitcoin as possible and make sure it's the real Bitcoin, because the journey you need to travel to in this world of Bitcoin, AI, and artificial intelligence and central bank digital currencies that we are moving to at a faster and faster pace, you need to hold it in self-custody. You need to own your own Bitcoin, and then you can play the games and maximize what you get and all the other things as a part of a risk managed strategy as well. So do the opposite of what they're saying you should do. You'll be fine. So the Bitcoin 2025 conference started out with some pre-presentations. One of the early ones was Michael Saylor from Strategy, previously MicroStrategy, MSTR, which is approaching and trying to hold and get 600,000 Bitcoin. Now, it used to trade, the share price used to trade at a significant premium over the value of the Bitcoin. Now it is getting closer and closer to parity. And there were questions around whether it would trade at a discount. And now people were asking the questions because anyone that was around in 2021, 2022, you'll know that there was a different product, very different, but people have memories because, things rhyme. They're not going to be exactly the same. But there was a product called GBTC, which was created by Barry Silbert, which was a mechanism for getting you to buy his shares instead of Bitcoin. And it used to trade at a massive premium. Then it traded at a discount. And this messed up a bunch of hedge funds that were trying to arbitrage the difference between the price of the actual Bitcoin and the shares. And this led to a cascading liquidation effect eventually that led to a crash in the price of Bitcoin, liquidation of all the Bitcoin-backed loans that I covered on previous episodes. And then the Bitcoin then goes, some of the companies go into bankruptcy. They dollarize your Bitcoin. And then eventually they end up auctioning off the Bitcoin. You get a dollar claim and a bunch of rich people end up with all the Bitcoin. And that is what happened now. I've been warning against that. And throughout Bitcoin 2025, my skepticism around the traditional financial players setting up a similar structure is only gone stronger. And so there was questions around that. And one of the things that was a very strange question, well, not a strange question, it was a great question, but a strange answer, was the request from somebody in the audience to say, can you do proof of reserves to demonstrate that you own those Bitcoin in MicroStrategy? Now, my speculation is that MicroStrategy custodies them with Coinbase, and Coinbase doesn't segregate wallets. And so there is probably no setup by which he can do proof of reserves without changing the custody relationship and changing that. But instead of saying that, he laid into anyone that is doing proof of reserves. Now, proof of reserves means that you publish your wallet address, and it is a public key, not a private key. A public key is kind of like a broadcast to the network. Anyone can see. It doesn't mean you can pull Bitcoin out of it. But he started to talk about how publishing public keys is a security risk and a security vulnerability, even though this is the best practice in our industry and in our sector. And so it was a very unpopular answer. Now, half of what he said was true, which is that people can publish their wallet address and they can do proof of reserves, but you have to have an audit in order to know whether anyone's borrowing against them or there's contracts against them or the trades happening. But at the same time, MicroStrategy is no longer just shares. It is all sorts of financial products and all sorts of financial engineering in order to generate arbitrage between leverage and options and all sorts of different products. And it is starting to get towards the type of thing that I warn people against, that these returns that they're generating on some of the other products are starting to reach that territory of too good to be true. And therefore, you don't know, maybe he's saying, I don't want to prove my reserves because then people could see my options trading strategies or whatever they're doing with those for other types of products within the shares, whatever the ecosystem is. But it is still a black box at this stage that is subject to a human audit, and a human audit is the best practice. You have fiduciary duties, you have punishments and all sorts of stuff that he did say correctly, but there is nothing to stop you also publishing your wallet address unless there is an alternative reason. And this is what created a lot of skepticism. And you know that I've been very skeptical about Michael Saylor's very fast rise to fame, and my skepticism around that. And so I wonder why he won't publish his proof of reserves, because interestingly, Paolo, the CTO and CEO of Tether, was also giving a presentation and shared that they have over 100,000 Bitcoin as part of their reserve pools, but the vast majority of it is backed by treasuries, which are held with Cantor Fitzgerald, but they publish their wallet addresses, and so do many of the major exchanges. Yes, it doesn't solve what are they doing with that, and you have to have different types of audits in the TradFi world. However, combining it with publishing your wallet address means that they can't be moved unless you go under additional scrutiny. And so therefore, it is an open question, and that gives me a little bit more skepticism. Other announcements on Bitcoin 2025 was people representing the Pakistani government. They said that they are going to be allocating 2,000 megawatts of its surplus energy for Bitcoin mining. Now, this is a bit of a controversial subject because a country that really is, if you've been watching any of my geopolitical side, you'll know that there was CIA intervention that led to Imran Khan being put in prison and then puppet governments being installed. And they're kind of in the middle between a proxy war between China's Belt and Road Initiative and the IMF. And then they are also a vassal state that is trying to be targeted by the proof of weapons network, where I call the proof of weapons network, where BlackRock is kind of the CEO. I've covered more details on that on previous episodes. And there were the recent tensions between Pakistan and India. But Pakistan is deeply indebted to the IMF. Their dollar reserves were running out, and so China has been stepping in, trying to rebuild. And again, it's in a proxy war. But the level of poverty, is interesting. That with challenges around energy all around, that there's this puppet government that is in place at the moment in the midst of a proxy war, and they allocate some of their resources towards Bitcoin mining. Now, I think this is the right way of doing it. If you're going to be involved in a Bitcoin strategic reserve strategy, then you want to build independence so you can fight back against it, and fight back against some of those different things. And mining is a good way of doing it if you don't have sovereign wealth and resources, so like some of the surplus countries. But they are saying that they've got about 10,000 megawatts of spare surplus electricity, and they're going to be allocating 2,000 of it towards Bitcoin mining so that they can stabilize their grid structures. Now, the theory works out, and we shall see what they do with that. But demand transparency. Don't listen to the Michael Saylor approach where you end up custodying them with Coinbase or something. They should be doing the El Salvador strategy where they publish their wallet address. You can see all the mined Bitcoin coming in from the mining pool. And then Pakistan can actually see that they are building those surplus reserves. They can see the efficiency improvement, and they can do it the right way rather than the corrupt way. So that is what I would say on top of it. But other than that, it is good to see whether this actually materializes or not, that a country like Pakistan may be able to, in theory, fight back against a proof of weapons network, build some sovereign wealth using Bitcoin mining, stabilize those energy grids, and provide transparency to their people. One of the things that I always said when I met with President Bukele, I said the mistake that I thought El Salvador made is that he didn't, when they issued $20 worth of Bitcoin for everybody that had a national ID, they should have locked it into a retirement plan structure, and they should have combined it with some of the lessons that you learned from, say, Singapore when it was decolonizing. They created products where the local population could get favorable terms in buying land and mortgages so that they felt like a shareholder in the country. They implement a Bitcoin strategy and they're locked in until retirement. That didn't happen in Singapore. That happened in El Salvador. But if they had locked it in rather than allowing people out, then as more and more Bitcoiners come along, they tend to target these wealthy Bitcoiners. That drives up the price of real estate, but you want your local population to feel like shareholders in the country rather than just having all these rich people come through. And then you can really replicate the success of the Singapore strategy, and you can really harmonize it around Bitcoin. And that's what I suggest a country does. If I were ever in charge of a country, that's the exact strategy that I would follow. But we shall see whether you can do these, whether any country does these types of things. Yeah, that's the real strategy. to really embrace a population around Bitcoin, build sovereign wealth. But anyway, Pakistan, in theory, at this stage, it will be another story that I will keep watching. They could mine their way out of the China and US proxy war, the playground that comes from that. And then you end up on the wrong side of the proof of weapons network, where BlackRock and the military industrial complex end up selling lots of weapons to India. And then you end up having these unnatural progressions where you have these groups, these militia groups that foreign agencies fund, and they do that in order to create violence so you can justify wars. They call it terrorism when it is actually unnatural interference in order to try and weaken and create a civil unrest campaign, which is the playbook of the West and the American empire that is currently being decolonized from the Middle East. And I'd love for Pakistan to build some sovereign wealth and see if they can prove this is what I call sovereignty through Bitcoin mining, if done correctly. Okay, we shall watch that space and I'll keep covering it. At the same time, the ex-founder of Twitter, Jack Dorsey, his company Block, they are going to be launching a Bitcoin Lightning payments into all Stripe payment terminals. And so they have these Stripe payment terminals, which are fiat currency for merchant processors. You're able to turn your phone into a merchant processing terminal. And now they're going to be integrating with Bitcoin Lightning payments. At the same time, Tether said they're going to be launching stablecoins on top of Bitcoin Lightning. Now, because Bitcoin, the layer one of it, can only handle about 7 transactions per second because it competes for block space, Layer 2 Lightning Network was created for private transactions and infinitely scalable transactions through, and this is what Lightning is. It's had slow adoption rate, but once you can do stable coins on top of Lightning, this is infinitely more scalable than doing it on layer 1 Bitcoin or even alternative chains, which is where all the stable coin volume went. And so it is building up towards this payment layer on top of Bitcoin, which was one of the original use cases, which we shall start to see if it starts to get more and more adoption as well. We had announcements from public company after public company. One of the ones that the next one, I guess, that made an announcement that is progressing is GameStop. And so GameStop announced that they have purchased $500 million, $500 million worth of Bitcoin already. They hold approximately $5.5 billion worth of cash on their balance sheet, and they've made their first purchase. So we shall see how much of that goes into Bitcoin. But currently, the market capitalization of the company GameStop, GME, last time I checked, it was approximately $15.5 billion. And we'll see where it goes next. We also had announcements from many uprising politicians that were using Bitcoin to try and gain popularity, as we saw last year. And the New York City, a rising politician there, is planning to, if he gets elected, issue a Bitcoin bond. This is Mayor Eric Adams. And he said that if he gets elected, or I'm not sure of the exact situation, maybe you can correct me in the comments what his current situation is. Not sure what degree of influence he has and whether he could do this, but he was putting out that he will launch a Bit bond for New York. Now, we all know that New York will be the hardest place to do this. He also wanted to rescind the Bit license, which was an early kind of way of capturing Bitcoin into Wall Street. New York is the most important state in terms of TradFi. He wants to rescind that to free New York of some of the more restrictive regulations from the old legacy Bit license and launch a Bit bond. And so whether that happens or not, that was the announcement anyway from Eric Adams, if anyone wants to support that and follow that along. The company that I have been skeptical about, because essentially it is a deep state construct of taking, some of the members of the Bitcoin community, Jack Mallers, and a guy that was involved in the El Salvador project. He has been enrolled into via Tether, some of the deep state partners like Cantor Fitzgerald and SoftBank. And they are continuing to buy. They did a SPAC, which is basically a public company shell. And then they start buying Bitcoin into it, restructure the company. But they made their first purchase of Bitcoin, and they just raised another approximately, 685 million, approximately $700 million in order to buy more Bitcoin. So this is trying to catch up with MicroStrategy. We'll see what the operating business is. But as I said, this really was Bitcoin 2025, a sales pitch for companies that want you to buy their shares so that they can buy Bitcoin, and companies that want you to custody their Bitcoin with them so that they can issue you a dollar loan and you can be subject to margin calls of Bitcoin with volatility. We also had politicians from UK Reform Party. It is a popular party. Nigel Farage was involved in the exit of UK Brexit, the infamous Brexit, from the European Union. And Nigel Farage is the leader of the Reform Party. And it is kind of one of those divide and conquer types of parties, those that believe in, pissed off with immigration, which is also some of the PSYOP strategies in order to create divide and conquer. The deep state funds various types of players in order to support. He had a bit of a tuffle from Israeli agent Tommy Robinson. And then you have these different characters like Nigel Farage that can play upon these different types of divide and conquer civil unrest strategies. You have to check where they get their funding from. As we said, all politicians serve a purpose and they all work for the corporate interests that they need to work for. But anyway, Nigel Farage is looking at using a strategic Bitcoin reserve bill for the UK. And he would like to introduce that if he comes into political power. The likelihood of that happening, because I don't believe he is sponsored by BlackRock to go into power, and those that get selected like Keir Starmer in order to destroy the country and work for the military-industrial complex, not work for the UK people, and find mechanisms for basically stealing money from the British people, handing it over to military contractors like the BlackRock portfolio companies via proxy partnerships with Trump and the US, US, which is the main proxy for the corporations and BlackRock's portfolio companies, so that you can siphon off money from the British people. You can push narratives through organizations like USAID that funds the BBC. And when you want to flip the narrative from we are defending democracy, then you can print billions and billions of dollars in military contracts, as is the case in the destabilization campaign that was the CIA operation between Russia and Ukraine. And now BlackRock owns approximately over 50% of the land. US gets all the rare earth minerals, and you can push these different types of campaigns. And now there is a campaign to say, Israel is no longer our best friend. I'll cover more of that in the geopolitical section. But this is, how they use the media in order to push these narratives. Well, that's why I don't believe that this will genuinely, lead to that, because Keir Starmer's the man to implement that mission. And they all have different missions for the relative, the different types of lobby groups that they work for. Back on the US side, we had announcements from Cynthia Lummis, who is introducing the Bitcoin Act. And she said that the Bitcoin Act, in order to buy 1 million Bitcoin in a revenue neutral way, which means you can't spend taxpayers' money, you can't spend additional money, but you can take the strategic reserves like gold, you can reprice them, and you can use that in order to buy Bitcoin. They said the bill should be coming out next week and it should hit the floor next week. Now, I don't think the Bitcoin strategic reserve at the federal level is likely to get through. I will keep watching that and tell you if it turns out to be wrong. But they seem to be getting through at the state level because I believe that BlackRock's strategy is to shrink America into a regional power, as I'll cover more in the macro section. And maybe that involves somewhat of decentralization, breaking up the states, giving state power, weakening federal power. And we shall see. There were comments from Trump's crypto czar, which is David Sachs. He's leading the AI and crypto strategy for the Trump administration. And he said that the US government may buy more Bitcoin, and it can be done. And if it can be done in a budget neutral way. So reiterating that they won't be buying Bitcoin, that they'll try and do a budget neutral strategy. Meanwhile, after Operation Choke Point 2.0 in 2023, which was exerted through, I believe, the Fed and BlackRock via the Biden administration in order to get ready for what they were going to do in 2024, which is approve the Bitcoin ETF, get as many of traditional financial players into Bitcoin, knowing that there would be these wider geopolitical games that would reset the world order, as I will be covering more in this week in the geopolitical section and the macro section. Once you reset the board, you then come in with a pro-crypto strategy. You install Trump. Trump then has the stable coins to roll over the debt so that those can benefit from all the yields that comes from issuing stable coins at higher interest rates. And you can get all of your buddies into Bitcoin through the Bitcoin ETF while you manage this transition and try and get as many people to, rather than own Bitcoin through BlackRock. And so we are starting to see all of this month, BlackRock's spot Bitcoin ETF, IBIT, it had 30 straight days where there were no outflows, which means that in every day, dollars were going out of fiat currency and purchasing those shares which are backed by Bitcoin. Ideally, you should be buying your own Bitcoin, but there was zero outflows for the last 30 days. And that also led to announcements from the SEC. Hester Peirce was there, very pro-Bitcoin and pro-crypto representation within the SEC. But the SEC said that it is going to be hosting an asset management conference, which is going to be featuring digital, basically discussing digital assets. And all of the TradFi players are going to be there. BlackRock, Fidelity, Franklin Templeton, they're all going to be in attendance. And this is going to be moving to the next phase where I think they'll be using real world assets and tokenizing everything to transition America into a technocracy, continue the destabilization campaign in Europe and UK, and then make it where you can tokenize all these different assets into this full technocracy that is the global agenda and the future of the West, while they reposition how you can outflow all of those assets into the trends and the multipolar world order that I've been covering. Well, anyway, they'll be deregulating in order for traditional financial players that will get a seat at the table and working with the SEC in order to make that a more friendly environment for the traditional financial players. There was an announcement from the SEC to state that staking proof of stake networks do not involve securities. So what that essentially means is that now that BlackRock has the Bitcoin ETF, rather than you owning your own Bitcoin and doing what, for example, you can stake your own ETH, for example, as a proof of stake network, convert the stake to Bitcoin. Rather than you doing that, they would rather you own ETH via BlackRock, and then BlackRock can stake it, and a stake, which is very different to Bitcoin. This is why proof of work is so different to proof of stake. When you have a proof of stake network, like Ethereum transitioned from proof of work to proof of stake, you can, by handing it over to BlackRock, they get the stake, they get influence over the network, and so now they can transition the Ethereum ETFs into giving you your staking yield, and they can gain more control. And so when BlackRock wants to tokenize everything, He may do it, or they may do it upon Ethereum, and then they can gain more control and they can distribute it amongst the proof of weapons network using the proof of stake network, as we transition to this super power which we have right now, which supersedes all governments, and governments essentially work for the BlackRock portfolio companies. And this is the next phase of that strategy. We also had an announcement from the SEC that it's going to be dropping the lawsuit against Binance. This is at the same time as what I'm going to be covering in the video, where we go through a presentation around what I think Trump's strategy is and his role as essentially a US proxy and US proxy president for BlackRock's portfolio companies. And so at the same time, BlackRock said that it is going to be acquiring 10% of Circle. Now, you know that I was an early shareholder in Circle. The Bank to the Future, the company I co-founded, has a secondary market where people can get exposure in private equity in companies like Circle. But they are due to go public. And before going public, they sold a 10% stake to BlackRock, which sets the valuation. And so once you set the valuation, if you want to merge that into Coinbase or you want to go public, we shall see what happens. Then you have set a higher valuation. And that is a smart strategy. And they can decide to go with BlackRock using USDC as their primary stablecoin issuer, as it resets the world into this multipolar world order that it is pushing the world to. And taking a 10% stake in Circle. I had that with another company I invested in a long time ago called Securitize, and BlackRock seems to be sniffing around. I'll share the ones that are public information, but you're starting to see more of that. Securitize is involved in the security token side, but you're seeing this deregulation environment. And you can clearly see that stablecoins backed by US debt is going to be used as a mechanism for controlling capital flows as we move into this multipolar world order that I think BlackRock and their portfolio companies have been pushing the world to. Now, what is stablecoins? And we'll go through a video shortly where we're going to be critiquing Trump. But stablecoins are essentially a debt crisis solution because they learned from Tether that you can back it by bonds. And that's why they're distributing to issuers like Trump's family himself that are going to be the future issuers. And they're going to be holding those assets with Cantor Fitzgerald. Cantor Fitzgerald, which is connected as a Federal Reserve discount broker. So if you want to do radical monetary policy, and you want to roll over the debt-based Ponzi scheme, you can get those that own stable coins to be the bag holder, as the real market for bonds, the 10-year and 30-year treasury, is going to be demanding a higher and higher interest. And we'll cover more about that in this week in macro. And so, you know, at the same time, the deep state actor, Cantor Fitzgerald, had his son, just as Trump is using his sons in order to accumulate vast wealth as we get to the end of the debt-based dollar Ponzi scheme, to get as much Bitcoin as possible and line up their investments. Cantor Fitzgerald is doing the same strategy. Cantor is being handed over to Howard Lutnick's son, while Howard Lutnick works for the Trump administration and gets his son to run Cantor Fitzgerald. And they announced that they're going to be launching they called it a gold-backed Bitcoin fund. What the pitch is essentially a fund. I haven't looked deeply into this. I'll look deeply into it as more details come through. But the idea is that you get protected by the downside of gold while you get the upside of Bitcoin. I think that just means a fund that's going to buy Bitcoin and buy gold for you, rather than you owning gold and you owning your own Bitcoin and them doing some kind of strategy where they think is protected. It's not going to be a flaw or anything. But, you know, by having gold and Bitcoin in a fund, they're able to frame it as a gold-backed Bitcoin fund, rather than, you know, based upon, again, shorting the dollar, using dollars, using gold, using Bitcoin, in line with what these deep state actors know the world is being transitioned to, which is this multipolar world order I've been covering for an awful long time. And what about Trump Media, another Trump-connected company? They announced that they have done a $2.5 billion deals in order to create a Bitcoin Treasury of the public company that was set up with Truth Social, which is being used in order to perpetuate out these different narratives, which I believe is being used by many of the traditional main Wall Street players that get insider information to get ahead of trades. And you can have this reconsolidation of hedge funds around those connected to the Trump administration. Well, they're going to be putting Bitcoin in there so he can protect his public company. He can protect his the last bits of debt and the dollar and earn as much Bitcoin. And essentially everything is saying MAGA is probably not going to have Bitcoin strategic reserves, but the Trump family are going to have Bitcoin strategic reserves. So you should be following as well. There was also another company, which is Eric Trump and Donald Trump Jr., that did a partnership with Hut 8 that I've been covering. American Bitcoin, they're going to be doing more and more Bitcoin mining to get as much Bitcoin as possible from efficient allocation of energy grids, as we discussed earlier in the Pakistani Bitcoin strategic reserves as well. Again, all of this is the effect of saying we're not bullish on the dollar, but we are bullish on Bitcoin. And we want as much of the yield from the higher rates at the expense of the American people over to personal enrichment as well. And we had Lutnick's sons that were all at the conference looking to do the same thing. We had Steve Witkoff's sons that were there looking at what they can do to get as much Bitcoin. We had Trump's sons there. We also had Vivek Ramaswamy, that is through his Strike, I think is Strife, I can't quite remember, fund, asset management. All of the politicians know what's coming next, and they are looking to personally capitalize and protect themselves, which is why you should make yourself great again. Follow the money. It's not Trump derangement syndrome. If you look back at all of my broadcasts, I covered this throughout the whole Biden administration and all the corruption that happens there because of the structural nature of the fact that the whole of America has been financialized. And so engaging in politics is simply tools for the corporations that control America as well. And so when Biden was the scammer, I also covered exactly what Biden was doing as well. And now Trump is the scammer that is giving you a different story. I'll be sharing exactly what Trump is doing, and I'll be making sure that you have the tools to make yourself great again. So with that in mind, I would like to demonstrate. I've got a 20-minute video. I'll break it up into approximately 3 to 5 minute segments, and then I'll be sharing with you. Now, this isn't about partisan politics. I'm not left, I'm not right. I think that's a psyop to distract you from how to really engage. And I'm going to be sharing what I think you should be doing if you want to engage in influencing the future of America. And guess what? It's not engaging in Republican, Democrat politics. It's engaging with the real forces that can actually make a difference. And I'll share those with you after this video. But before that, I want to demonstrate without a shadow of a doubt, because I'm not saying I support this politician or I support some of the Democrat and the political maneuvers that are being used here. I'm just saying that there was not anything in this video that I wasn't already covering in Bitcoin Hard Talk, and it's facts. And it's just let's just call it what it actually is. It's point bank corruption. And if you follow if you follow what they say and the media says, instead of making yourself great again and follow the money, I just want to demonstrate to you so that you have this as well. So Azad, can we play the video that I set aside where there is some politicians in Congress, and they're going to be sharing many of the things, and we'll go through the first part, and then I'll start talking, give some commentary, and then I'll be making sure that we go to the last section of part one of This Week in Bitcoin. Well, I'll be sharing with you can do with Bitcoin to make yourself great again. And then we'll cover part 2 and part 3. So Azad, let's start the video.
I'd ask that we dispense with the quorum call and I be recognized.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, usually public corruption happens in secret. The politicians that do it, they know it's wrong to accept money in exchange for favorable government treatment, and so they hide it until they're found out. A textbook example would be Louisiana Governor Edwin Edwards, who in the 1990s was quietly taking bribes from businessmen who wanted to get licenses for riverboat casinos. In the late 1990s, Edwards was convicted of the crimes of extortion, racketeering, money laundering. The way in which he was doing it was like out of a movie. In one instance, a businessman handed the governor a suitcase full of $100 bills totaling $400,000, all in order to get a 6-0 commission ruling in favor of this casino. Eventually, as with most all corrupt officials who are taking money privately, Edwards was discovered, he was disgraced, and he went to jail. As we speak, our president, Donald Trump, is going to the Middle East on a public corruption tour. He's no less corrupt than Edwin Edwards of Louisiana. In fact, he's way more corrupt. Edwin Edwards took $400,000. Well, in the Middle East, Donald Trump will cement deals totaling in the billions in exchange for favorable treatment by the U.S. federal government for these Gulf countries. The key difference is that Donald Trump isn't hiding it like other corrupt officials are. He's not ashamed. He's not doing it in secret. His corruption is wildly public, and his hope is that by doing it publicly, he can con the American people into thinking that it's not corruption because he's not hiding it. But what he's doing in reality is no different than any other corrupt public official who does it in private, other than the fact that Trump's corruption, his foreign policy corruption, is just so much bigger in scope and the impact that it has on the American people than anything a corrupt mayor or a corrupt governor may have done. Trump's first major foreign trip, and he just landed, is to Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and UAE. Not because these are our most important allies in the world, not because these are the most important countries in the world, not because he's going there to talk about making the Middle East more safe and more secure. No, his first trip is to these 3 countries because these are the 3 countries that have agreed to pay Donald Trump money. Donald Trump is going to collect tribute, and it's all just out in the open. Frankly, it's pretty easy to see this coming. Recent former presidents, Republicans and Democrats, have always very seriously and studiously avoided even the appearance of a conflict of interest. President Bush placed his assets into a qualified blind trust where investment decisions were made without his knowledge or input. Both Biden and Obama divested all of their assets except for cash and mutual funds. They didn't enter into any new business ventures while in the White House. In contrast, Trump has refused to abide by these standard ethics rules. His family runs his business, but nobody honestly believes that the kids are really in charge. President Trump is still calling the shots. His interests are not in a blind trust. He's made no pledge that he won't do new deals, even with foreign entities, while he's in office. In fact, he is doing deals seemingly every single week. He's open for business, and every foreign government knows it. In fact, it appears that right now the Gulf states are trying to outdo each other to up the price of buying an American president. And because Trump is greedy and he's insecure, he wants to fit in with the billionaire class, he is traveling to the region with his hat out for further solicitations. So let's ask, what is the going rate right now for a Gulf country to buy access to Donald Trump, to get favorable treatment?
Let's just give a bit of commentary there. So obviously there is, politics aside, this is the left trying to score points, the Democrats trying to score points over the Republicans. But let's face it, the entire system has been designed this way from the beginning. And so while you have these blind trusts, these blind trusts are managed by those that receive money from the corporate interests, and politics is just simply a way of taking the Federal Reserve printed money that creates inflation, stealing it from the American people, and then using these blind trust organizations, NGOs, and non-governmental organizations, and organizations like USAID in order to launch covert operations that exist outside of Congress, outside of Senate, and probably has influence over the judicial. So while America, the Constitution, was created to protect Americans from the tyranny of government, which was the idea, it never protected against the tyranny of the corporations that are now a stateless power, that are global multinational institutions that are able to use the printing press of the Federal Reserve, use the proof of weapons network that I've always discussed, because the shareholders of the Federal Reserve are the banks. And those are global institutions. Those banks went public over time. As they went public, they were acquired by ETFs and fund managers and your pension and insurance premiums and money laundered via college endowments in order to change the curriculum. So where you have essentially doctors that are being taught how to be drug dealers, and you have economics people, students that are being taught how to be debt dealers for the banks. And having economic policies that just create Keynesian economics, and you become a debt dealer, as it were. And so through this system, you created a confiscation of wealth from the American people over to the corporate interests that receive all these corrupt contracts, and the politicians, via lobby and via these blind trusts and NGOs, are able to skim off money at the top. Now, as he quite rightly said, Trump is just doing it in the open. But this is what all the politicians are doing. And this is the confusion that people want you to have. They want you to believe this is democracy when it is a courtocracy. And the courtocracy is that they need you to be distracted, debating and trying to engage in the political process, when in reality, the only thing that matters is the profits of the corporations that control and install the politicians. As I've always called, I call it the proof of weapons network. And because that power has consolidated via investment banks like Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan into all these public companies, and the trillions of dollars of assets are now managed by organizations like BlackRock, then they actually, as global institutions, are able to use America, Europe, and UK as vassal states by securitizing every aspect of them, which they want to do with real world assets. And they want to securitize every aspect so that they can usher in this surveillance state. America's going to be done as a technocracy on stablecoins, as I've covered in the past. Europe's going to be done via central bank digital currencies. And artificial intelligence is the mechanism by which you can remove the whole economy. We are building decentralized artificial intelligence, and it's also ushering in a world which is becoming increasingly harder and harder to predict. So the whole economies are looking at hosting that artificial intelligence data in their country, which is why there are nuclear deals being done in the Middle East, which is why various Gulf countries have now got board seats within BlackRock, because they built sovereign wealth, because they received money that was extorted from the American people with their energy, as we have covered in previous broadcasts. If you watch the episodes on the multipolar world order, also watch the episodes where I covered Did America Sell Itself? You can watch many of those different, if you fancy. Make sure you go to the Apple podcast and Spotify and follow Bitcoin Hard Talk there. And then you can go through some of these previous episodes, download them, watch them when you're at the gym, or while you're driving or whatever. So you can catch up on those, because it's all important information for you to make yourself great again and catch up. Anyway, through this mechanism, there has always been this level of corruption, and that is through lobby power that you end up in this situation where our politicians just don't work for us. And so I'll go through, after we've done this clip, how you can engage in the process if you want to make a difference. But what he is exposing is out in the open with Trump in blind sight, exactly what they all do. And that's how politics works. So let's look at some of the individual deals, and then I'll tie it in to some of the crypto trends, and then we can go through the macro side and the geopolitical side of all the events that came in that I've been preparing you for. Azad, let's carry on where we left off.
For Qatar, we recently found out it's a $400 million luxury plane. This plane has been opulently configured for royal use. It's not a gift to the US government. It's a personal gift to the president. The terms of the arrangement apparently include a stipulation that after Trump leaves office, it will be transferred to Trump, to his presidential library, which means Trump gets the so-called floating palace for himself. This is outrageous. We've never seen anything like this before in American history. A foreign government gifting a $400 million luxury plane to the President of the United States. This is spelled out as blatantly unconstitutional by our founding fathers. They wrote into the Constitution a specific clause called the Emoluments Clause, which prohibits federal office holders from accepting gifts from any king, prince, or foreign state without the consent of Congress. Like, how much clearer could it be? It's unconstitutional. It's illegal. The founding fathers knew it was an evil to have members of Congress or the President of the United States accepting expensive gifts from a foreign nation who in exchange want favors from the US government. Donald Trump's acceptance of the luxury plane from a foreign monarch is basically the corruption that our founding fathers were seeking to prevent. But that's not all he's getting from Qatar. The Trump Organization recently signed a $5.5 billion golf course and real estate deal with Dar Global and Qatari Dayar, a firm established by Qatar's sovereign wealth fund. $5.5 billion. While Trump's in office, it would have been unthinkable for any previous president to enter into a $5.5 billion business deal with anybody, never mind a foreign government, while they are in office, and it still should be unthinkable. Now, Qatar is a U.S. ally. It's a very important ally, but they're a complicated country. They have their own interests, some of which do not overlap with ours. A foreign government like Qatar should not have a $5 billion chit hanging over the head of a sitting U.S. president, and they should not be gifting him a $400 million plane. That should kind of go without saying. For Saudi Arabia, the price is also in the billions. Soon after leaving the White House, in Trump's first term, his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, created a private equity firm and got a $2 billion investment from Saudi Arabia. The board of the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund questioned whether this was smart to invest that much money in a totally unproven fund, but the Saudi Crown Prince himself overruled the board, undoubtedly seeing the political advantage of investing directly with the Trump family. But this was only the beginning. The Trump family has put things into overdrive during the second term. Within his first 3 weeks of office, Trump convened a meeting at the White House with the head of the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund, not to discuss matters of state, but to negotiate a deal between the PGA and the Saudi-backed LIV Golf Tour. You want to know why? To try to bring PGA tournaments back to Trump golf courses. Convene a meeting in the White House with the Saudis in order to enrich himself. In addition to the $5 billion Qatari real estate deal, the Trump Organization is also partnering with a Saudi firm on a $1 billion Trump-branded hotel and tower in Dubai. The property's website, this is like unbelievable. The property's website, this is a Trump-financed property along with a Saudi investment fund, offers free 10-year golden visas to the United States, hinting at the opportunity for investors in Trump's property to buy residency in the United States and a pathway to citizenship. For the UAE, the price is somewhere north of $2 billion. Last week, Eric Trump and World Liberty Financial co-founder Zach Witkoff spoke at a conference in Dubai on crypto called Token 2049. As an aside here, it's just so fantastic and bone-chilling how transparent these guys are in their use of public positions to enrich themselves. I'm going to tell the story of Trump's stablecoin and the corruption with the Emiratis. But let's just pause for a second and consider the fact that the Trump family could have partnered with anybody in the world on their new crypto venture, World Liberty Financial. But of all the people in the world to partner with on this new crypto venture, they chose the son of Trump's Middle East envoy. Trump's Middle East envoy, the guy who's making all the decisions on U.S. policy in the Middle East, just to make it crystal clear to the Gulf countries that when they deal with World Liberty Financial, Trump's crypto venture, that they are dealing directly with the people responsible for making U.S. policy in the Middle East. It's just stunning. Literally.
Okay, let's pause there, and then we'll go through the construct.
Running a crypto.
Now, do you think he's been watching Bitcoin Hard Talk? Because if you remember, I've been covering this for months. Nobody was talking about the construct of World Liberty Financial. And then I also talked about the deep state connections and the operations like urban movers that were connected to those that got the Mossad agents that got arrested during the 9/11 bombings and everything that happened from there. You can go back to those episodes. I've been covering it all. And I told you that this one was coming, that Steve Witkoff would be negotiating deals in the Middle East. And he was the person that was there during Trump's second assassination attempt on the golf course. And he had deep, deep state connections. And now that it is his son that is part of World Liberty Financial, and then I shared the different types of constructs with stablecoin. Everyone called me a conspiracy theorist. And I said, these will be the tools and weapons that will be used. And this is how I got everybody ahead of all of the trends. By following the money and working through this early. Now, many people said, you are absolutely crazy. This will never happen. It is out of the world wild. But now I think it is happening. And you get months and months of head start. And that is what I do at Bitcoin Hard Talk. I always get you months and months and months ahead by following the money. I'm going to be doing that in a lot more of the sections. Now, this is really interesting because for those that have been watching previous episodes of Bitcoin Hard Talk, you'll know that I was building through the exact construct of this, understanding what tariff policies were. We'll do more of that in macro, but everyone else was thinking tariff policies were going to make America great again. And yet I was able to share exactly the real impacts and why it was, because I know that politicians are there to work for their corporate interest, and BlackRock portfolio companies, and BlackRock is investing in a multipolar world order, and therefore Trump was installed in order to achieve that. Now, people build these relationships with Trump and suddenly think that this is the first guy that's going to be able to break this, even though the proof of weapons network is the power structure that no politician can overcome. And so that is how we get everything ahead. And I hope those are the long-term listeners are starting to able to see this. Right, we're going to do the final part of the video. We're going to look at some of the crypto side. This ties it together into this week in Bitcoin. And then we'll be doing part 2 on macro and geopolitics. So I said it's going to be a bit more extended in the Bitcoin section. Also, do me a favor, like, share, subscribe. If you're watching this for the first time, I'm trying to get to 100,000 subscribers. We're very close on YouTube. So please do that. And we can, because once we get to 100,000, I'll be able to get an additional review on the channel with the YouTube team. Okay, now let's look right into the depths. Token 2049, many, many years ago, I spoke at these events. I don't go to conferences anymore, but they were putting together this different types of information, which will help you understand how these deals are constructed so you can make yourself great again while Trump is not going to be making America great again, given who he works for. Okay, so let's go into the next part of the crypto deal.
Venture, and then going directly into the Middle East in order to find their first investment. And guess what? Miracle, they found it. MGX, an investment firm backed by the Emirati government at this conference, announced that they had looked at all the crypto companies in the world that they could partner with to invest $2 billion in the crypto exchange Binance, and they selected, wait for it, drum roll, the company run by the sons of the President of the United States and the U.S. Middle East envoy. $2 billion. Now, World Liberty's role in this transaction is not that complicated. It's kind of similar to a bank. MGX, this Emirati firm, deposits $2 billion with the firm, and in return receives the stablecoin to be used on these crypto exchanges. The firm holds on to these dollars, invests them, and keeps the profits for themselves. So the Trump-Witkoff company just gets basically a gift of capital. And if they just use that $2 billion to invest in treasury bonds, it would profit around $85 million a year from these investments alone. And the money goes directly to Trump, just directly to Trump. It's literally not complicated. Emiratis, World Liberty Financial, Donald Trump. This isn't 1990s Louisiana. Nobody's hiding it. On World Liberty's website, they say an entity affiliated with Donald J. Trump owns 60% of the equity in the company. And because of this deal, Trump and Witkoff can further capitalize because Trump's stablecoin just became the fifth most valuable stablecoin in the world because of the Emirati investment. And if the plane and the real estate deals and the private equity fund investment and the stablecoin weren't enough for you, Trump has found one last way for Gulf money to flow seamlessly into his pocket. It's called the Trump meme coin. What's the business model here? Trump gets a huge payment whenever he releases a batch of these meme coins, which, by the way, have no underlying value other than just the demand that people have for Trump's coin. And then each time a Trump coin is bought or sold, a small fee is routed directly to the company owned by Trump. According to one analysis, nearly $325 million in fees have been accrued since the coin was launched in January. Just 3 months, 4 months, 4.5 months, $325 million worth of fees. Trump hides the buyers of the coin. In this way, the meme coin is kind of a little bit like Louisiana corruption. But we know that the majority of the buyers aren't Americans who want to help Trump make this nation great again. The majority of the buyers of Trump coin are super rich foreigners, princes, oligarchs, authoritarians, who are buying the coin in order to get in good with Trump or to get something in exchange. Now, one great thing about buying the coin is that you get access to Trump and the White House. And again, they're not hiding this. 2 weeks ago, Trump announced that he would host a private dinner at the White House with seats reserved for exclusively for the top 220 Trump coin holders. In 2 days since the announcement, Trump's company made $900,000 in fees because everybody, mostly foreigners, many of them probably in the Gulf, were buying up the coin as quickly as they could in order to get one of these seats. If a mayor of a small town was selling meetings at City Hall for $1,000, he would be run out of town on a rail. But that's exactly what Donald Trump is doing in the Middle East and all over the world, as foreign buyers line up to buy the meme coin, guaranteed private access to Donald Trump at the White House.
Okay, let's stop there. So that wouldn't be new to many of you that have been watching Bitcoin Hard Talk because, when you get to follow the money, and this is the very interesting thing about the nature of this new market. This is all on chain and you get to see plausible, you don't get plausible deniability when you're doing this via the banking network. These are all transactions that will stay on chain forever. Essentially, I've always told people to avoid all the craziness, all the crypto scams. They are just mechanisms for trying to extract you out of what everyone really wants, which is Bitcoin. Bitcoin in self-custody is how you opt out of all this stuff. So anyway, you can start to see now. Also, remember, I also shared that who was the largest investor in World Liberty Financial? It was Justin Sun. Justin Sun, the guy that built a stablecoin, which is very questionable, that connected some of the old legacy exchanges in China, like Huobi and Poloniex, and that I believe there's holes in those exchanges. I can't prove it, but I think there was some creative tactics using. He was getting investigated by the SEC, and then suddenly, lo and behold, Justin Sun, his SEC case goes away. Now, I think there is genuine role for consumer protection in that construct, and we will find out whether that gets revealed. But I think eventually that whole thing will be. But essentially, this is how American politics works, and this is what I want people to understand. This is how I can predict. And people call me a conspiracy theorist because I talk about the proof of weapons network and the coordinations that large corporations, which I'll be covering more in the macro section and the geopolitical section, people think it's a conspiracy theory. But I can just simply follow what the corporations are doing in order to predict what the politicians are doing. And people just find that too wild to believe that it could actually be true. Well, I hope now you're starting to see the methodology, and everything that is happening right now is about building Trump family personal Bitcoin strategic reserves first, as well as Howard Lutnick Bitcoin strategic reserves first, as well as Steve Witkoff Bitcoin strategic reserves first. And I probably could go through more and more and more if I were to put the time into it. And what's happening to America's Bitcoin strategic reserves, we shall see. But my guess is they'll be lost, because this is a run-up to front run, and not financial advice, but I've been sharing ever since Bitcoin was $3 that eventually you would have a game theory event where all individuals, all corporations, all governments, and eventually central banks, they will all need to protect themselves with Bitcoin, as the debt-based fiat Ponzi scheme produces the inevitable, predictable, and guaranteed result that debt gets out of control, and they have to construct ever more elaborate ways of selling you their debt and making you the bag holder while their credit rating gets downgraded. In fact, I covered exactly that in the book that I wrote in 2011 and launched at the very first Bitcoin conference in Europe, Bank to the Future, Protect Your Future Before Governments Go Bust. And you are welcome to get a free copy and digital download of that if you don't want to buy it on Amazon by going to simondixon.com and signing up for free to the Bitcoin Hard Talk membership portal, where you can get many more resources. So my message to you is understand how the system works, then you can follow the money. And if you don't want to do it, each and every week, subscribe to my channel, follow me on Rumble in case it gets shut down, join me on my podcast, and I'll do the work for you, because I've been doing it ever since Bitcoin was $3, so that you can make yourself great again. And hashtag me on X, MYGA, if you have any questions on this. So the West is owned by asset managers. Once you understand this, you can develop a strategy if you want to make your country great again. The currency is controlled by the banks, and the Federal Reserve, in the case of the US, one of the parts of the proof of weapons network, is the one that controls the dollars. The banks get to create it, and that redistributes wealth into the asset managers. And then you can control governments through lobby power and corporate lobby power. And then you have the deep state in order to create the wars you want, and you become global. And global means you have no national interest in the country, and therefore politicians just become a way of extracting value from the people, which is why now you understand UK, now you understand Europe, and now you understand what is happening to America, because this was the same colonial techniques that Britain used, America used, Europe used in order to destabilize the Middle East, Africa, the global South. And now, because it's created this stateless global institution, it is being worked upon, it is being used upon its own countries, and people are able to protect themselves by opting out with Bitcoin. Anyway, presidents are just simply middle management. Real power comes from the central banks. And how do you boycott the central bank? You own Bitcoin, which was created in 2008 to resist against the corrupt central banking system. And real power, real corporate power, is consolidated in the asset managers, the largest of which is BlackRock, that also owns shares in Vanguard and State Street. And they are more important than politicians. So if you want to influence, stop messing around with politicians, because they don't work for you. They will only work for you if you pay them money. And if you pay the money, you have to be more economically powerful and a high net worth individual, which gets you membership to some of these proof of weapons network, which is what we saw at Bitcoin 2024 with the crypto lobby and the Bitcoin lobby and everything you have seen so far. So you are either in two positions if you want to influence politics. You are either rich already, and the way that this has worked is you have to beat the proof of weapons network, which is designed to indebt and enslave anybody playing in fiat currencies. And so to play in the lobby game, you need to be wealthy. To become wealthy, the best way I know is own more Bitcoin this month than the previous month. And everybody that has done that for a minimum of 4 years in a cycle will review and see they beat every single player of the proof of weapons network. Every public company, every hedge fund, gold, real estate, every asset. I can't promise it will happen again, but I've been saying it will happen ever since $3 and every cycle. And then you are able to boycott the Federal Reserve as well. Now, if you want to change, rather than going after the politicians, now that we have this kind of Dutch East India company like BlackRock that exists, that is way more powerful than government, they do listen when you can coordinate together and pool your money. So where you spend your money is how you boycott. You boycott the Federal Reserve and you make yourself great again at the same time by saving in Bitcoin and avoiding these dollar proxy derivatives leverage debt that everyone at Bitcoin 2025 was trying to pitch you into so they can make themselves great again at the expense of everybody else. You don't do it via shares. You don't do it via borrowing against your Bitcoin. You do it by a good old-fashioned way. Own more Bitcoin this month than the previous month. And once you become economically powerful by beating the game, if you want, you can participate in lobbies. Now, if you are not rich, then you can't participate in lobbies. How do you influence? That's where the collective boycotting and you deciding how you spend your money is how you control the process, because governments don't care unless you're rich. And so therefore, the only way to influence the corporations is to boycott and collectively pool your money and decide where you're going to spend your money. That's where pressure works. As we saw during some of the boycotts, that it impacted share price, and therefore you get changes. And that's why I love Bitcoin, because it makes you more economically powerful by adopting better habits, the reverse of what they ask you to do, so that you can become powerful enough to join the lobby and influence the proof of weapons network from the inside. And you get to boycott the head of the snake, which is the banking system. And that's how you win. And then you can, you can actually control where your money is spent. And then you can spend local. You cannot take on debt. And that's how we take down the system. And even if collectively that doesn't impact that, you get to free yourself in an alternative financial system, you can boycott BlackRock by owning it in self-custody rather than allowing them to protect themselves so that they can reset the world order in the way that they want. That's how real change happens. And that's why I want you to use Bitcoin to make yourself great again. Now we're going to move over to part 2, where we're going to be digging deeper into everything that happened this week in macro, the taco trade, and everything you need to know before we cover part 3, this week in geopolitics. So just before we go into part 2, do me a favor, like, share, subscribe, hit the bell symbol, hit all. You'll get a notification from YouTube. Go over to Rumble, follow me over there in case I get shut down from YouTube when they do that review. Once I hit 100K subscribers, I think we'll be okay. And if not, we back everything up on simondixon.com. So make sure you've got a free login to the Bitcoin Hard Talk membership portal. And if you want real-time updates every single day, then I'm on X as well. So follow me on X. And I would like you to do me a favor to help the algorithms, put a little comment below this video, or like and share it with your family. I'm going to get a bit more water. Then we're going to go into Bitcoin Hard Talk, episode 83. Make yourself great again. Part 2, this week in macro.